What's up everyone, today we're going to take a look at the Marvel Legends Heralds of Galactus 2-pack, and we have the Fallen One and Terrax. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, or even hit the super thanks button. I really appreciate all engagement on my channel. Now let's have a quick look at the box. Up front we have renders of the two action figures, and a little bit of their artwork in the background, a kind of blued out. The top of the box we have Heralds of Galactus, that's clearly declared on the top of the box. Below we have some product information and a little notice about Hasbro's plastic-free packaging. And we move on to the side. Just had to zoom out a little bit so you can see the full artwork. But it's basically those two characters. The Fallen One looks like he's on a light colored palette over here, while we have Terrax in his usual grey, reds and blues. Now we come on to the back of the box. Once again, it's the renders of the characters. The Fallen One with a couple of accessories over here, and rather disappointingly Terrax doesn't have anything else besides the axe that he's holding. And we also have a couple of grayed out comic panels at the back. So moving on to that last side of the box, we have the renders of those two characters again in vanilla pose. So let's go ahead and get these guys open. As usual, slicing off that little bit of tape. And getting the figures out of the box. The two main figures are over here, held by that cardboard insert, and the bag of accessories are up front. Terrax, of course, just comes with his axe, while the Fallen One comes with a set of interchangeable hands and two power effects. So let's go ahead and free up those two figures from the cardboard insert. Even though Terrax is bigger, he actually appears to be positioned lower on the cardboard insert. So here we have the Fallen One out of his bag, and also freeing Terrax from his bag. He's quite tightly wrapped compared to the Fallen One. I just tore off a little bit of the paper. So here they are. This 2-pack comes in at an elevated price point, so it is rather disappointing that we only have these accessories with no alternate heads for both figures. The Fallen One comes with one left gripping hand and one right fist, so coupled with his default hands on the figure, he gets a complete set of gripping hands and fists. There's nothing new about the sculpt of these hands, and they're cast in a dark blue-gray plastic. These hands are articulated with hinges that go inwards as well as outwards. The power effects are cast in a translucent blue plastic, and they do have a little bit of glitter flecking in them, so this catches the light well, and also has a bit of gloss and shininess to the power effects. These are exactly the same sculpt as other power effects that we've received before from other characters like Magneto, Wonder Man, and Havoc. So the Fallen One has a complete set of gripping hands, which are pretty useless considering that he doesn't come with any weapons, and neither does he use any weapons in the comics. So he should have instead come with some splayed or relaxed hands. I also want to point out that the pegs are longer on the gripping hands compared to the fists. So his left gripping hand somehow ends up with the peg sticking out, which looks pretty ugly. So right now I'm shortening that peg on his left gripping hand with a pair of clippers. So with that shorter peg, that left gripping hand now goes in correctly into his forearm. And of course the power effects work just fine with his fists popped onto the figure. For his sculpt, the Fallen One is an almost entire reuse of that Grim Reaper body mold also seen on Wonder Man. His only new part is his head sculpt, which is not too bad, and for some strange reason, he's using the feet from the Sunfire body mold. And as you can immediately tell, those feet are just way too small proportionally to his body, so that is a big bummer. Moreover, his entire body is just a dark blue-gray plastic. There's not a single bit of paint, wash or highlight on his body at all. So he looks just completely dull and boring, almost like a mass of dark colored Play-Doh with tiny feet. So besides already not coming with an alternate head sculpt and some proper accessories, the makeup of his body parts is just really extremely lazy. And that's even more obvious when you have Gore standing beside him for contrast, because Gore is also made up of mostly the Grim Reaper body mold, but he's got enough uniquely sculpted parts and paint applications to make him stand out and look unique. The Fallen One's head sculpt is decent. He's sculpted with a screaming expression, and you can see how all those lines in his forehead and his cheeks just below his eyes really look like he's scrunching up his face in anger. There's white paint applications for his eyes, which are sharp enough, and then there's more sharp applications of white paint for his teeth. He's got translucent blue plastic for his hair, and it's also got that bit of flecking and glittery stuff in his hair, so that actually helps it to stand out, which is not that big of an ask considering how boring the rest of his body sculpt is. However, I do think that his hair could have benefited from some highlights or even a wash to bring out more of the textures in the wavy energy parts of his hair. Now the problem with having a ragey screaming face is that it only looks good in action shots. In the vanilla stance, he just looks like he's really bored, particularly at his really dull and lackluster body sculpt. There's really not much to talk about on his body sculpt. The usual sculpted musculature is all there. There's nothing new on this body, not even some shading to bring out some of those sculpting and textures. And finally, to the bottom, it just ends in disappointment with those tiny feet. Articulation-wise, his head is on a ball hinge, so you get to go all the way around. You also get some sideways tilting. You can look down that far, as well as up, but that's hindered by the sculpt of the energy hair. Swivel hinge at the shoulders that go all the way around. That peg feels a bit gummy, but it also goes out that far. Upper bicep swivel for 360 spin. Double jointed elbows, and you can still see those pins there, so that's also a disappointment considering the price point of this set, that we're not getting newly engineered joints where the pins are not visible. Swivel hinge at the wrist for 360 spin, articulating in and out. Mid-torso hinge for forward bend and backward bend. Waist swivel for 360. Ball jointed hips that are quite stiff, and they only go out that far. The stiff ball joints do allow you to get some good range forward and backward. Upper thigh swivel for 360 spin. Double jointed knees, and you can still see those pins, but they still give you a good range of motion. Calf swivel for 360. Ankle hinge for upward tilt and downward tilt. And finally ankle pivot outwards and inwards. And I still can't get over how small his feet look, making his ankles look fat, if that makes any sense. There's nothing new about the engineering on his body sculpt, so the articulation is pretty much standard, and he does look quite silly projecting energy with gripping hands. I did find that the open, relaxed hands from the Vulcan body do actually pop onto this figure and look somewhat decent with those energy effects, and despite the slight difference in the shade of the blue plastic, it's still quite fudgeable with this figure. So after the sheer laziness of the Fallen One, let's now have a look at Terrax. And we start with his accessory. Everything on him is exactly the same as the Builder figure that we got 10 years ago. So just bear in mind for this entire review, his sculpt and his engineering is something that was developed and produced 10 years ago. I'd just like to remind you guys that the original Builder figure is on the left for this review, while the new Terrax figure that comes in this 2-pack is on the right. So there's nothing new in the sculpt of his axe. It's a slightly different shade of metallic silver plastic. The only subtle difference is that he now gets some black wash on the ends of the axe, so that brings out some of that sculpting detail. But it's also a really strange choice of treatment, because none of that wash is present on the handle of the axe. And to be fair, the sculpt is already pretty sharp and decent, particularly on this silver plastic. So all the sculpted detail does already stand out even without that black wash. I also want to point out that you can still disassemble the axe just like the original Builder figure part. So yep, completely zero new engineering. The new entirely reused Terrax gets no other accessories like interchangeable hands, so the minimum expectation is that he still holds the axe just fine in his one and only right gripping hand. If I haven't said it already, the sculpt and engineering is also exactly the same on the new figure over here. There are some subtle differences in the treatment of different parts, and I'll go to them in detail in a little bit. Starting off with his head sculpt, he's still got that kind of goofy grimace on his face, kind of manual dark wash, so that brought out all the details like the lines in his face. The new one still has that same sculpt, but this time it's got digital printing for the whites in his eyes and teeth, and even that dark lines for that so-called wash to bring out those lines in his face. I'll say that both treatments for his face still bring out details equally well, but I do prefer the applications of the paint in his eyes on the new one. However, his teeth look more perfect on the old one, which is a little strange, but also still satisfying to look at. A subtle difference in the paint applications also for his so-called beard piece. On the old one, the blues went all the way in, down into the sides, but on the new one, they made sure to keep the gray skin tone on that gap in his beard. Now we turn around to the back of the figure, and this is where you can see the digital wash isn't applied on the back of the head at all. While on the old one, it was applied more organically, so you can see a little bit of it, even though there's not much definition in that round bald head. Now we scoot down to his torso. The red plastic for his shoulder armor was a glossy red, while on the new one it's a metallic cherry plastic. I don't necessarily have a preference for one or the other, but with the current direction that Marvel Legends is taking, with brighter colors that reflect the way the figures look in the comics, maybe the bright glossy red from 10 years ago was or is more on point. There's a little difference in paint applications on the top of his back, but I prefer the old one. He's got some gray over here, and there's also wash to bring out the definition in his muscles on his back. The new one looks rather uninteresting because of that blue plastic, but it's the back of the figure, so that's no big deal. Now we have a look at the treatment on his arms. I should also mention that the tones of grey plastic are different on both figures, with the new one looking a little more brown. The new one has a white overspray that's applied digitally, and you can see how those dots are quite obvious from the digital printing technique. I guess this white or light grey paint acts as a highlight for his muscles. And when you move down to his forearms, he's got a coat of flat, bright red paint, and that is a poor match for the metallic cherry plastic that's on his hand. The difference is too obvious and I cannot ignore it. And that's in contrast to the older figure, where the paint is a flat red, which also matches the flat red plastic. And the whole arm has got a dark wash that brings out the tone of his muscles and sculpting. And since the wash is also applied organically, it goes all the way around to the back of the arm. But on the new one, Hasbro has really not even disguised the fact that digital printing is only done on the front of this figure, resulting in the back of his arm having that same good sculpting, but no paint or highlights to bring out any of the definition. Now looking at the lower bodies, and the biggest thing that stands out to me is how the yellowish gold paint on the old one for his belt as well as the cuffs on his boots match up really well and still pop even after 10 years. On the new one, the gold is a duller shade, so it looks fine on the belt because it's painted on, but when you look at the cuffs on his boots, that's unpainted plastic. And there's really a difference in the shine of the way the belt looks compared to the cuff on his boots. And once again, that's laziness from Hasbro. His red skirt piece has the same treatment with the dark blue paint on the insides. And let's have a look at his legs because the treatment is exactly the same as his arms. You will see that digital application of white highlights again compared to the dark wash on the old one. And when you flip them to the back once more, the dark wash on the old one is applied uniformly. However, on the new one, once again, no paint and no highlights. His boots are once again that metallic cherry red with no paint, and we see that similarly on the older figure, it was just a flat red plastic. So overall, we can see just a little subtle differences between the old figure and the new one. We still don't get an alternate neutral head sculpt, and I'm actually leaning over to the older builder figure and say that if you have the old one, don't even bother getting the new one at all. Even though you know what to expect, let's still go through the articulation. Double ball dumbbell joint for the head, so there's 360 rotation. He does get some sideways wiggling. He looks down just that little bit, as well as upwards a little more. Swivel hinge at the shoulders, but they don't go all the way around thanks to his large shoulder armor. The hinge that does go out quite a good bit. Bicep swivel, so that spins 360. Still a single hinged elbow that gets you not even 90 degrees. Swivel hinge at the wrist for 360 spin, and it goes in as well as out. Mid torso hinge, so he goes bending forward and goes backward that much. But of course, pushing him too far back disengages his armor from his belt. He's got a waist swivel that goes 360 if you can spin that skirt together with his upper torso. He's still got the old swivel hinge joints at his hips instead of the modern ball joints, but that means he gets a beautiful split. Still the same old good range forward and backward as well. Thigh swivel for a 360 spin. Double jointed hinged knees that afford a good range for a big guy. A well disguised calf swivel by that boot. Ankle tilt that feels detented and goes up, as well as down, and ankle pivot outwards and inwards. If there was anything about the articulation of the old Terrax Build-A-Figure that I would improve, that would be double hinged elbows. But of course we didn't get that with this new one. The fallen one stands at 6 3/4 of an inch up to the top of his energy hair, and that's about 17 centimeters. While Terrax stands at 7 3/4 of an inch, and that's just over 19.5 centimeters. For size comparisons, here they are with Star-Lord, Thanos, and Nova. And of course we gotta put them together with other Heralds, Fire Lords, Thor, and Silver Surfer. And here they are with the Fantastic Four. Putting them with other lines like the G.I. Joe Classified series, and some Star Wars Black series. Hasbro dropped the ball so badly on this set, and coupled with the obvious price increase, it feels like everything lackluster here is executed intentionally, and Hasbro isn't subtle about this money grab. This set is only good to fill the holes in your collection for Galactus Heralds, and that's it. Knowing that the HasLab Galactus is very close to release, Hasbro is banking on fans to pick this one up regardless of the thoughtless design of the figures. This is an easy pass. If you only want to fill out your Heralds of Galactus, I still urge you to only get this on clearance. Please like and share this video, let me know what you think in the comments below, subscribe to my channel, and also hit that super thanks button. Thanks for watching, take care and stay safe.